Sure, Canon colors are better than Sony's straight out of camera, but I'm here to tell you that it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to explain exactly why in this video. But first, a little bit of context. For as long as pretty much I can remember, ever since I had a Canon camera back in like 2010, which must have been like the T2i or T3i, everyone used to tell me, oh, I love the colors on Canon over Sony. And there's a few reasons why that might be the case. First, Canon applies a more aggressive gamma curve, essentially creating a more contrasty image straight out of camera. A lot of people seem to really like that sort of contrasty look where the shadows look really dark and the highlights look really bright. Personally, I like a little bit less contrast, but for whatever reason, for a very long time, people like the baked-in contrast that Canon cameras provided. And then there's the color science side of it, which gets a little bit nerdy, but I'll try to explain it simply here. Canon tends to have much deeper greens and blues because they actually infuse a little bit of more cyan into them, creating a more pleasing sort of contrast between those primary colors. And then people also really like to bring up skin tones when talking about Canon color science. And although this is completely subjective, and honestly, I don't really notice that much of a difference myself, a lot of people like the way that skin tones look on Canon cameras. They tend to be more of that like red, pink hue to them, giving them a little more life and making your skin look more lively. It almost gives off an old film stock look in that way because of how much warmer the skin tones are when compared to Sony cameras. And this is really appealing to those portrait photographers, but they also hit those landscape photographers with that green and blue richness in their colors as well. And then when we look at the colors straight out of a Sony camera, they tend to be less contrasty, not quite as punchy when it comes to the saturation of the primary colors. And in fact, their skin tones actually seem to lean towards yellow and sometimes even a little bit of green tint. And that can be a little bit off-putting when you're talking about human skin. So that's pretty much the history of why people tended to prefer Canon colors over the Sony ones. Fast forward to the present day, 2024, does that really matter though? And the thing is, when you're gonna shoot raw photos or maybe a log video file, it really doesn't matter. And honestly, I would even argue that if you shoot in JPEG, it probably doesn't even matter. And I'll explain why. Because look, I think the operative word in this debate is pretty much straight out of camera. If you're someone who doesn't edit their photos whatsoever and just allows the camera to produce the image that you're gonna, save for your records or post online, then sure, I guess color science somewhat matters. Because then you don't have to do any sort of color correction. You're gonna accept whatever colors come out of your Canon or Sony camera and just share that as you would. But if you are someone who even does a modicum of editing on your photos, whether that be in Lightroom, doing some video editing in colors in Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, then the color science doesn't matter at all. Like, I can take a Sony picture with all of its color shifts that are different from Canon and pretty much match it to a Canon picture exactly with just a tweak of a few sliders in Lightroom. And when you're shooting video, now that Sony cameras pretty much shoot always in 10-bit color, you're not gonna have any sort of weird color distortion issues when you do adjust the color in post. Because I think that was the biggest issue for Sony cameras when they were shooting video back then. Changing a color could really mess the image up quickly, versus now when things are shot in 422 in 10-bit, adjusting color is very easy and you can match pretty much any camera you want now. And honestly, now in 2024, you can pretty much just find a LUT online that can convert your Sony camera colors into Canon camera colors. So even if you're someone who doesn't want to go through all this trouble of adjusting a few sliders every single time you use a Sony camera and want it to match a little bit more like a Canon camera, you can just buy a LUT and it'll pretty much do that for you. So I think when talking to most people who I know do this professionally, photo and video work, you're gonna be shooting in log or raw. So essentially color science doesn't matter at all. But honestly, I think you should really look at other things about your camera over just color science. Some other features that I think are actually way more important than color science, especially in 2024, include things like low light performance, color bit depth, dynamic range, and autofocus performance. And that's just really to name a few. And honestly, it honestly depends on your filmmaking style and what you want out of your camera. Both Canon and Sony are great cameras for both photos and video, Although I do honestly think that Sony is a little bit better when it comes to video. That's actually a topic for another video. So don't let color science prevent you from continuing to invest in Sony cameras. Sincerely, it really doesn't matter in this modern day and age. I hope this video gave you guys some clarity on the debate of color science. I really think it's something that's completely overblown. It may have mattered years ago, but in the modern age, it really doesn't matter. But hey, let me know what you think about this debate in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you and see if anyone really thinks that color science matters anymore. If you're struggling with colors in your videos, you might want to check out this white balance tutorial here. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.